Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview as we take a look at the front pages. First, though, our top stories this evening. Donald Trump's senior advisors have been forced to defend his immigration ban, saying the president's controversial executive order is not a ban on Muslims. The Home Secretary Amber Rudd today described Mr. Trump's travel ban as divisive. MPs will debate Mr. Trump's state visit to Britain, that debate taking place next month. And thousands of gay and bisexual men have been posthumously pardoned. The new act is known as Turing's Law, after the World War II codebreaker Alan Turing, who was pardoned himself for gross indecency in 2013. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour then, we'll see what's making the headlines. This evening with the author Badisha and the political editor of The Sun, Tom Newton-Dunn. Welcome to both of you, good to see you. Yeah. So as ever, to the front pages this evening, The Eye leading with predictions that up to 1.5 million people could turn out to protest Donald Trump's state visit. The Financial Times reports Mr. Trump's trade chief, Peter Navarro, has accused Germany of using a weak euro to exploit the US. The Telegraph too focusing on Mr. Navarro's comments, which came 24 hours after Angela Merkel criticised the American president's immigration travel ban. The Times says Britain's rail fares will be given the biggest overhaul in 30 years after a Times investigation exposed how passengers were being overcharged. The Metro also covers the ticket price shake-up, saying rail bosses have pledged that customers will always get the cheapest fare. The Daily Express says a group of Remain MPs tried to block the UK's exit from the European Union by adding a veto to the proposed law. The Daily Mirror reports Madeleine McCann's parents have lost a court bid to sue the former police chief, who claims they covered up their daughter's death. The Guardian has a think tank's warning that inflation and welfare cuts could see the UK return to the inequality of the Thatcher years. The Sun's front page is the cost to the NHS after a tourist went into labour on a jet at Heathrow, or bound for Heathrow. And the Daily Mail also covers the costs of health tourism, reporting that it is draining the NHS of hundreds of millions of pounds a year. So let's talk more about those stories and the pages inside too with Badisha and Tom Newton-Dunn. And it is to the FT you want to go to first with the latest Trump side attack, this time on Europe and specifically Germany.
Yeah, the Trump presidency is proving so interesting. It's sort of like dog years. So one day in Trump's presidency feels like an entire year for commentators. So now his top trade negotiator, Peter Navarro, has come out and complained about the so-called devalued Deutsche Mark, which Ms. Merkel is using to gain some sort of fiscal advantage across the EU. But it's more symbolic than that because it shows that Trump is really coming out swinging for the symbolic and literal heart of the EU. He is beginning to trash talk Merkel and Germany and the idea of the euro because what he really wants to do is have lots of one-on-one trade treaties with all of these constituent nations. He doesn't want to deal with the EU as a bloc, to use Obama's phrase.
Will it wash in terms of the trash talk, and will he get anywhere trying to dissect the EU and talk individually to these nations?
Well, the economic realities of this extraordinary state, I mean, if you put aside just for 1 minute the staggering feat of diplomacy carried out today by Peter Navarro, with Trump's absolute delight, because Donald Trump in his press conference with Theresa May in Washington, D.C. last week, in his interview with The Times, very happy not just to stick it right in the eye of Germany and Angela Merkel, you know, terrible leader, led on all these migrants, EU's going down the Swanee, but also to wantonly plead for the destruction of the EU. I mean, all that aside, the economics of it is slightly shifty. Germany doesn't control the value of the euro with relation to, you know, other currencies like the pound or the dollar or the yen. That's the ECB. Via setting interest rates. The ECB happens to be based in Frankfurt, admittedly, but it is independent. The value of the euro being low does mean that BMWs are a lot cheaper in America, making American car equivalents harder to compete. But a very low value euro, according to Americans, is still cripplingly high for countries like Greece and Italy. Yeah. And that's been their big complaint, that the euro value is too high, meaning they're uncompetitive. So Germany is damned if it does and damned if it doesn't really, and you know, it's not really in control of it. Now, will it work is another matter altogether. Trump has style now. We've seen this happen before several different times, whether he's taking on Syria, Iraq migrants, whether he's taking on torture, whether he's taking on the Democrats, his opponents during the Republican primaries. He absolutely bombs them from a massive height with abuse, leaving them slightly shell-shocked, as indeed Angela Merkel is at the moment, and then comes in with his offer.
Well, this is the interesting thing.
Tactics of a bully businessman.
Yes, and this is the interesting thing, isn't it, that it feeds into the existential threat against the European Union, so including Brexit and other nations too. Donald Trump and his America are now in there as well.
That's what's so interesting. So Donald Tusk, who's the head of the European Council, he's very, very diplomatic, but he's actually quite a direct politician. He's bemoaned these sorts of declarations because he actually pointed out that over the last couple of years, all across the world, and including nations within the EU which are moving towards the right, like, for example, Marine Le Pen in France, have been increasingly Eurosceptic, and this is extremely alarming. But in Donald Trump's case, it's interesting because he doesn't behave like a politician. He is anomalous. He's not like another Republican politician in history. His bark and his bite are the same thing. And for a long time, I think we all thought he doesn't really mean it, or he's going to say one thing but do a watered-down version. No, it turned out that exactly what he said he was going to do, he did it. He does it in a brash way.
Yet for some reason this is a shock to us.
Well, I know, we're so naive.
And actually Boris
months
Johnson,
of warning.
It's because, is it us? Do we think that he's secretly nice, that at the end of the day he, takes off his shoes and puts on his slippers and
liberal
goes,
metropolitan consensus that he would
naivety.
just simply never go ahead with this. It was just to get him elected. He campaigned in poetry, governed in prose, etc. But Donald Tusk gave a fascinating speech today. Donald Tusk is the leader of the EU Council, former Prime Minister of Poland, and a very adept politician, I think, watching him over the years, of calling the mood and predicting what's going to happen in the future. And he was right on Brexit and Cameron's renegotiation, for example, saying we've got to give this guy something more because we could lose Britain otherwise, and that's what happened. Here he said today, for the first time, possibly in its 50, 60 years of existence, the modern-day EU is on its own. This is it. We've lost America. They want to beat us up. Russia's on our other borders. They want to get rid of us. And China has never really given a stuff about us.
Or have a nibble at Eastern Europe. You never know.
So we're no longer this great progressive force of progress as we've relied on everyone looking at us for the world. No one cares about us anymore. So we're going to have to reinvent ourselves. We're going to have to sell ourselves again, become sexy to our own voters, to the rest of the world again, which is, what a lot of people, I think, would thoroughly agree with. We have to become relevant to us and the world. And the other point he makes is it's all well and good breaking away from the EU and saying we want to be sovereign again. You're never going to, not in the modern world will you ever do that. What you will be is a client state of either Russia, China, or the US of A.
So as part of that, is there an acceptance that actually the million migrants into Germany was a stage too far for European citizens, do you think? Or
no,
not?
I don't think that's true. And in fact, Merkel is extremely widely respected across Europe. What Tusk is saying, which I agree with, is that there's been a sort of branding problem, which is that the petty inconveniences of the EU are trumpeted up. So people talk about this terrible thing which involves sending a diplomat all the way to Brussels to sit in on a meeting as if that's hard work, whereas all the many good things about being part of a community, a world community which deals with trade and culture and all sorts of other things, including cancer research, including standardizations of medicines, people don't know about it. Why? Because it usually works, and if there's not a problem, you don't know about it. So for Tusk even to say this in his very measured way, we should listen to it. The problem is, how do you deal with someone like Donald Trump? This is a guy who wakes up and sits up.
The problem that 500 million Europeans have with the EU is deeper than simply branding. There's a disconnect.
No, I agree with you. I'm
all
saying
around the peripheries with the centre. The centre felt they'd been left them behind.
No, I agree with you.
And they need to reconnect.
I think it's about knowledge, but I also think that in the age that we live in, sometimes when you put the facts in front of people, they don't compute. It doesn't sort of go in. I've been, campaigning about the refugee crisis for ages, and I try and argue against slogans with facts, and my opposite number is sort of sitting there going, they don't care. And now we have the ultimate example of that. And he's the President of the United States. His form of policy making is he wakes up he opens his iPad and he starts tweeting. How do you deal with
I think he
someone
actually
like
wakes
that?
up, goes to the loo, sits on it, and then starts tweeting, to be precise.
Yes, and that's probably
As
going to be a
standard.
cartoon. You know, on the day after tomorrow's papers, we're going to have that in all its raw, naked glory. Now that you've said it.
Yes, but the translation of standardisation of medicines in this country was the banning of bendy bananas, wasn't it? You know, it's how you report
Exactly,
it.
that's what people
yeah,
remember.
but I wouldn't just shoot the messenger on this.
Yeah.
You know, there is also, you know, millions and millions of Europeans feel a massive dislocation with the centre, with Brussels. They feel like they don't talk to them, they're not answering their problems. And that's what happened with Brexit. And Donald Tusk is absolutely right. And if only, quite frankly, a whole lot of EU leaders have worked this out a few years ago, we might not be where we are
And many
today.
EU leaders have built their own walls, haven't they? If we're talking, you know, Trump and comparisons, to try and stop migration. To stop,
Yeah, and
stop
they're
The
migration.
talking
Hungarians
about
are putting
it.
up razor wire fences a year ago.
Exactly. The Hungarians
Exactly.
were the really shocking ones. And what we have seen and what Trump is increasing is the militarization of humanitarian problems. So instead of talking about flows of people and individual stories, they're talking about arming the police. So the police behave like an army, and then the topography of your country becomes militarized. So walls, tear gas, corralling people in places.
Meanwhile, Brexit
Talking about
trundles
Brexit.
on. There we are inside the Times. We've gone down the rabbit hole into Brexit fantasy. This is much respected Ken Clarke, although perhaps not on the Tory benches right now.
By some Tories, not many. Today was a really interesting day, I thought, in the House of Commons. I didn't think it was going to be. I was sitting up in the gallery watching all these people making, quite frankly, what I thought was going to be the same speeches they've made, some of them for 40 years. Ken Clarke has been in the House of Commons longer than I've been alive making speeches, and I won't tell you how long that is, but longer, and making speeches about the EU. Actually, what happened today was, suddenly dawned on everyone, this was a real moment. After years of arguing about this, decades of arguing about, are we going to be in, are we going to be out, suddenly MPs were actually going to have a say. They were going to have to cast a vote in favour of Article 50 bill or against it. And Ken Clarke got up and said what he's been saying for 50 years, which is, we need to stay in, and quite frankly, you've all gone mad. In fact, he used the Times headline, we've disappeared down this rabbit hole. You people, you Brexiteers, are talking Alice in Wonderland, fantasy economics, and you're all mad hatters. Other MPs, for example, Keir Starmer, got up and saying something quite passionate and interesting. I've already lost you, and you're already moving on to Nigel Farage.
The Times
Brexit
ticking
movie.
on. I mean, you know.
This is very funny. Nigel Farage
This is the Star,
claims
having quite a lot of fun.
that there's going to be a Brexit movie. It is profoundly untrue.
Yes.
For the reasons Badisha is about to tell you exactly why. But we just had to pick it because it's such a great
I didn't mean to
train-spotting
stop you
photo
in your
montage.
tracks, but I was moving on to
I
other
know when I've
pictures
lost
while
you,
you could
and
carry on.
I lost you on my
I can't believe
fascinating
I've got this one. The reason this
debate about
is
the Commons.
never going to happen is because 90% of what Farage says is, broadly speaking, not true. And actually, if you look beneath that brilliant sort of train-spotting inspired top image, he's saying, well, you know, I've been contacted by 1 or 2 movie production companies, and they want to do Brexit the movie. And of course, either Hollywood would do it, and I'm sure that they're not remotely interested in a small British island's inner politics, or the UK film industry would do it, and I'm pretty sure they mainly voted Remain. So actually what I think will happen is that in 100 years' time, it'll be like, you know, Suffragette, the movie now. It'll be recast with national treasures in the main roles.
Farage has been putting this one around.
Yeah.
There's going to be
Because he
making
wants it to
Brexit
happen, but then...
and it won't. But there's another really good reason, by the way, which is half the cinema watching audience across the entire country would automatically not go because they voted Remain and they hate Farage. But the wonderful, and the Daily Star have done a good job here.
They
so
have.
You've got the photo of Posh Boy, Sick Boy, Dud instead of Spud, Michael Gove, bit harsh on Michael Gove, and Pint On, Farage himself rather than Renton. You get it.
Yes, I do, luckily. And just very quickly, in terms of, because we haven't got any time at all, as you can see, in terms of the vote that we'll get, when will it be, you know, what amendments might we see, how quickly will it go through,
so
and what might the result be?
Tomorrow night, the second reading, nothing's going to happen, don't worry about it. Come back a week on Wednesday, a week tomorrow night, that's the big one. Third reading, fireworks.
And your guesstimate for how many will vote to stay in?
It will be 500 voting to leave, 100 voting to stay in, but the key is the amendments. What conditions various rebel Tory MPs align with Labour to try and slap on the government.
OK. Still to come, how David Beckham is netting the taxpayer millions a year. Back with that in just a moment. Well, welcome back to the press preview, taking a look through tomorrow's newspapers, joined by the author Badisha and the political editor of The Sun, Tom Newton-Dunn. Welcome back to both of you. So, to The Sun, your paper has a so-called health tourist who was on a jet to Heathrow, carrying quads, 2 of whom sadly died. They were in intensive care and cost the taxpayer or the NHS £2,000 per day each, a total of £500,000, which she cannot repay.
A BBC documentary exposed to this, I would have to. So the BBC are now covering the same sort of things which we've been covering for a fair few years now.
Which takes us to the Daily Mail, with a broader look at this story.
Which, if you put that there, Nigerian lady who gave birth in a London hospital and then never paid her £500,000 bill, put all those together, because there are thousands of people a year doing that, thousands of health tourists a year, and the Public Accounts Committee tomorrow publishes a report making the same warning to MPs that the hospitals, GPs are simply failing to recoup huge debts which foreigners who have no right for free treatment in our hospitals or GP surgeries for still 30 years after a similar report in the House of Commons made the same warning to the government.
So why don't they? Is it difficult to process the admin? Are they all too busy to do it?
No.
Why are they not actually pursuing the money back?
I think it's something to do with the infrastructure. So this is not a news story. We know that the NHS is grossly underfunded in many different ways, but also that it needs a real overhaul in terms of its systems. So if you read into the report, there are lots of concerns, not necessarily about people scamming the system, although in any system, of course, that happens, and I don't
Because the
dispute
Sun
that.
story was almost, the indication was that she's pregnant, heavily pregnant, get on a flight and then let the NHS pick up the pieces.
No, she was actually on the way back to Nigeria from the US on a flight that went via Heathrow, went into labour, 4 babies, 2 of them died. So it's actually not a very happy story in the end, because 2 of these babies
It does make
died.
people utterly furious, though, and the reason why it carries on because doctors and hospitals simply do not want it. They think their job is to treat people.
So why not do it like you do in Switzerland, for example? You show your Visa card or whatever it might be first, which is what the Telegraph is saying. Pay first.
Because the massive problem is doctors in hospitals and GP clinics say it is not our job to be immigration officials. We are here to treat people, and that is why the NHS is in such dire financial straits, one would argue.
And the wider system doesn't enable the quick invoicing and tracing of patients, and that's what the report says, is that these invoices, which are supposed to be chasing payments, just sort of never get sent out. So there's a lag within the system. And additionally, it's sort of like the prison system in an odd way. Different hospitals tend to behave like different institutions, and they don't link up.
Very, very quickly, up the top of the Daily Express, it's inside the papers as well, the tax bill for the Beckhams.
This is our favourite story of the day, is it not?
They do pay their taxes. They pay. I mean, they make a whopping amount of money. So in the last year, it was nearly 50 million as a sort of joint brand. But they're paying around 20% tax on it regularly. So
they paid £8 million in tax last year on profits of 40 million, which is a tax rate of roughly 20%, which is the corporation tax rate, which we should be paying. So it is an absolutely shocking story that celebrities are paying their tax.
Rich people are paying their taxes
tonight, and good on the Beckhams for doing so.
2 quite self-made people. I think they deserve what they have.
No dodgy schemes.
No dodgy schemes. And actually, Victoria Beckham
accounts.
is an amazing designer, and I really like her.
Bidisha, Tom Newton-Dunn, lovely to have you on. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Don't forget, Donald Trump's Supreme Court coming up in the next hour. Back in a moment.